The death of Jesus Christ marked one of the most significant moments in history. But what happened after his final breath on the cross? The events that unfolded in the days and weeks following his crucifixion would not only transform the lives of his closest followers, but would ripple across the Roman Empire, forever shaping the world as we know it today. In this video, we'll explore the supernatural signs that followed Jesus' death, the actions of those who witnessed his final moments, and the miraculous resurrection that would change everything. From the immediate reactions of his disciples to the birth of a movement that would spread across nations, join us as we uncover the extraordinary moments that occurred after Jesus died. What really happened after the tomb was sealed? And how did the world respond to the news of the empty grave? Let's dive deep into the events that followed the crucifixion and discover the profound impact they continue to have today. Immediate events after Jesus' death. As Jesus took his last breath on the cross, a series of dramatic and extraordinary events unfolded, leaving an indelible mark on those who witnessed them. These moments were not just signs of grief or despair, but were interpreted by many as divine occurrences, underscoring the significance of what had just transpired. In this section, we'll walk through the immediate events following his death, each contributing to the growing belief that Jesus was more than just a man. 1. The earthquake and darkness. The Gospel accounts describe a deep, unnatural darkness that fell over the land from noon until 3 p.m., the moment of Jesus' death. This eerie darkness wasn't simply a solar eclipse or passing storm. It was seen as a sign from God, an acknowledgement of the profound spiritual shift taking place. For 3 hours, the world seemingly held its breath as creation itself reacted to the crucifixion of the Son of God. Immediately after Jesus cried out, "It is finished," and took his final breath, the earth shook violently. The Gospel of Matthew recounts that the ground trembled and rocks split open. This earthquake was unlike any normal seismic activity. It was a direct response from creation to the death of its creator, a dramatic punctuation to the most pivotal moment in human history. The symbolism of the earth quaking at the moment of his death can't be overstated. This wasn't just a physical event, but a spiritual one, signaling that something monumental had taken place. 2. The veil of the temple torn. One of the most mysterious and powerful events was the tearing of the temple veil. Inside the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, there was a thick curtain that separated the Holy of Holies, the innermost and most sacred part of the temple, from the rest of the structure. This veil represented the separation between God and humanity, a barrier that only the high priest could cross, and only once a year on the Day of Atonement. At the moment of Jesus' death, the veil was torn in two, from top to bottom. This tearing wasn't just a random act of destruction. It held profound theological meaning. By tearing the veil, God was showing that the barrier between humanity and himself had been removed through the death of Jesus. No longer would priests be needed to mediate between God and people. Jesus' sacrifice had made direct access to God possible for everyone. The temple authorities, who would have witnessed the torn veil, were undoubtedly shaken by its implications. 3. The reaction of the Roman centurion. One of the most remarkable and immediate responses came from an unlikely figure, a Roman centurion, the very man tasked with overseeing the crucifixion. As the earthquake shook the ground and Jesus' final cry echoed in the air, this hardened soldier, who had likely seen many crucifixions in his career, was moved to declare, "Surely this man was the Son of God." This was a profound confession from a Gentile, especially one who had been part of the Roman authority responsible for maintaining order and enforcing capital punishment. The centurion's response highlights the impact that Jesus' death had, not just on his followers, but even on those who were neutral or opposed to him. His words reflect an acknowledgement of something far greater than an ordinary death. The fact that a Roman, representing the occupying power and perhaps the most unlikely person to be moved by the event, was convinced of Jesus' divinity speaks to the weight of what had transpired. 4. The burial by Joseph of Arimathea. Once Jesus had died, the question of what would happen to his body arose. Normally, the bodies of those crucified were left to rot or be disposed of in unmarked graves, as a further act of humiliation. However, a secret disciple of Jesus, Joseph of Arimathea, stepped forward to claim the body. Joseph was a wealthy and influential member of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council that had condemned Jesus. Despite his position, Joseph had quietly followed Jesus and believed in his message. Joseph went to the Roman governor Pontius Pilate to request Jesus' body, an act of great courage considering the risk of association with a convicted criminal. Pilate, surprised that Jesus had already died, granted permission. This act of retrieving Jesus' body was not only significant in terms of Jewish burial customs, but also fulfilled prophecies that the Messiah would be buried in a rich man's tomb. Joseph placed Jesus' body in a tomb that had been freshly cut from rock, one intended for his own use. This tomb was located in a garden near the site of the crucifixion, making it convenient for the quick burial that needed to happen before the Sabbath began at sundown. Joseph, assisted by Nicodemus, another member of the Sanhedrin who had secretly followed Jesus, prepared the body with spices and linen in accordance with Jewish burial customs. Their act of devotion and care for Jesus' body was a testament to the love and reverence they had for him, even in the face of immense personal risk. 5. The sealing of the tomb. After Jesus' body was placed in the tomb, the Jewish leaders, fearing that his followers might attempt to steal the body and claim that he had risen from the dead, approached Pilate again. They requested that the tomb be sealed and guarded to prevent any tampering. Pilate agreed, and a Roman guard was posted at the tomb, with a large stone rolled in front of the entrance to ensure that no one could enter or leave without detection. The sealing of the tomb was a critical moment because it set the stage for what would happen next. The religious authorities believed that by securing the tomb, they had prevented any possibility of Jesus' followers spreading rumors of a resurrection. However, their actions would only serve to make the miraculous events that followed even more undeniable. The resurrection and appearances. 3 days after Jesus was laid in the tomb, an event occurred that would become the cornerstone of Christian belief, the resurrection. Early on Sunday morning, Mary Magdalene and a few other women went to the tomb, intending to anoint Jesus' body with spices as part of the Jewish burial customs. To their astonishment, they found the stone rolled away and the tomb empty. Confused and distraught, they encountered an angel who told them that Jesus had risen from the dead. The women were the first to receive the news of the resurrection, which in itself was extraordinary in a society where women's testimonies were often disregarded. Overjoyed and terrified, they ran to tell the disciples, who initially doubted the incredible news. This moment of disbelief was short-lived. Jesus began to appear to his followers, first to Mary Magdalene and then to 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus. Later, he appeared to the 11 as they hid in fear behind locked doors. The risen Jesus, bearing the marks of his crucifixion, stood among them, speaking peace to their troubled hearts. His appearance was not merely a spiritual vision but a physical, bodily resurrection. The disciples could see and touch him, removing all doubt that he had truly risen from the dead. One of the most famous post-resurrection appearances occurred when Jesus showed himself to Thomas, who had not been with the other disciples when they first saw the risen Lord. Doubting their story, Thomas declared that he would not believe unless he could place his fingers in the wounds of Jesus' hands and side. A week later, Jesus appeared again, inviting Thomas to do just that. Overcome with awe, Thomas exclaimed, "My Lord and my God." This encounter powerfully demonstrates how the resurrection transformed even the most skeptical of followers. In the days following his resurrection, Jesus continued to appear to his disciples and other followers. He spent time teaching them, explaining how the scriptures had foretold his death and resurrection, and preparing them for what was to come. These appearances laid the groundwork for what would become the early Christian movement, a movement rooted in the belief that Jesus had conquered death and was alive. Spread of the gospel. After his resurrection, Jesus gave his disciples what has come to be known as the Great Commission. He instructed them to go into all the world and preach the gospel to all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. This command would drive the explosive growth of the Christian faith, beginning in Jerusalem and spreading across the Roman Empire. However, at the time of the resurrection, the disciples were still a small, fearful group. They had been hiding from the authorities, unsure of what the future held. But everything changed on the day of Pentecost. On that day, the Holy Spirit descended upon the disciples as they were gathered in prayer. Tongues of fire rested on their heads, and they began to speak in languages they had never known. This was the moment that transformed the disciples from a frightened band into bold preachers of the gospel. Peter, who had denied Jesus 3 times during his trial, now stood before a crowd of thousands and boldly proclaimed that Jesus had risen from the dead. His sermon cut to the heart of the listeners, and on that day, about 3,000 people were baptized and joined the growing Christian community. From that point on, the message of Jesus' death and resurrection spread like wildfire. The apostles traveled far and wide, preaching the good news to Jews and Gentiles alike. Miracles and healings accompanied their message, drawing even more people to the faith. The early church began to grow rapidly, meeting in homes and sharing everything they had. Despite the dangers they faced, these early Christians were united in their mission to spread the gospel, convinced that the risen Jesus had given them the power to do so. Reactions from Jewish and Roman authorities. As the Christian movement gained momentum, it quickly caught the attention of both Jewish and Roman authorities. The Jewish leaders, who had orchestrated Jesus' death, were deeply concerned about the growing number of people claiming that he had risen from the dead. They saw this as a direct threat to their authority and to the religious order they sought to maintain. The Sanhedrin, the ruling council of Jewish elders, began to take measures to suppress the new movement. At first, the Jewish authorities tried to silence the apostles through threats and imprisonment. Peter and John were arrested for preaching about the resurrection, but even after being warned to stop, they continued to proclaim the good news boldly. "We must obey God rather than men," they declared when brought before the Sanhedrin. The Jewish leaders were at a loss, unsure how to deal with a movement that only seemed to grow stronger under persecution. Meanwhile, the Roman authorities were less concerned with the religious claims of the Christians than with the possibility of unrest. Rome valued order above all else, and any movement that threatened the peace could be met with swift punishment. As the Christian faith spread, it became increasingly viewed as a subversive force, especially as more Gentiles joined the ranks of believers. Persecution of early Christians. As the Christian movement continued to grow, it also began to face increasing persecution. One of the earliest and most notable instances of this was the martyrdom of Stephen, a deacon in the early church who boldly preached about Jesus. His fearless proclamation of the gospel angered the Jewish leaders, and he was arrested and brought before the Sanhedrin. When he refused to recant his faith, he was dragged outside the city and stoned to death. Stephen's martyrdom marked the beginning of a broader persecution of Christians in Jerusalem. Among those present at Stephen's execution was a young man named Saul. At that time, Saul was a zealous Pharisee, committed to stamping out what he saw as a dangerous sect. He went from house to house, dragging Christians off to prison and seeking to destroy the fledgling church. However, Saul's story took a dramatic turn when on the road to Damascus, he encountered the risen Jesus. This encounter changed Saul's life forever. He became Paul, one of the most passionate and influential apostles of the Christian faith, traveling across the Roman Empire to spread the gospel and establish churches. Despite the persecution they faced, the early Christians remained steadfast in their faith. Rather than weakening the movement, persecution often had the opposite effect, strengthening the resolve of believers and inspiring others to join the cause. The blood of the martyrs became the seed of the church, as Tertullian, an early Christian writer, famously said. As we reflect on the profound impact of these moments, we're reminded that the story of Jesus is not just a historical account, but a living reality that continues to influence and inspire millions. If you found this video insightful, make sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video for more in-depth explorations of history, theology, and faith. Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep seeking the truth.